So the one on the left is really dark, but it's Aristotle. And then the one on the right is Isaac Newton. All right. And the reason why I picked those two is because, Aristotle was a philosopher. And Isaac Newton would consider himself a philosopher as well. Okay. Where we would look at Isaac Newton and say he was a physicist. So what I want to do is sort of unpack a little bit as to why Isaac Newton would think that way, and whether there's something lacking in our understanding of especially natural sciences today, in which maybe there can be a sort of Catholic revision or a Catholic updating or a Catholic contribution. All right, so let's start with, as we always do, with definitions. So when we use the term science, all right, what is science? So here is the sort of standard scholastic definition. Science is an organized body of knowledge based on first principles and whose primary purpose is to seek the knowledge of causes. Everybody sort of like that definition? Thorough enough? All right, so there's three parts of it, right? There's the organized body of knowledge. There is first principles. And then there's its purpose, right? Why it exists. To investigate causes. All right, so that's really broad, right? Like, so if I asked you for a definition of science before I did that, what would you give me? Knowledge. Fair enough.
Study of the natural world.
Study of the natural world. Would theology be a science? Anyone? What do you think? Based on that definition. Yeah, so it's an organized body of knowledge. Where do we get the first principles for theology from?
Revelation.
Divine revelation. All right. Yes, Karen.
Does this definition draw a distinction between, I guess, the mere acquiring of knowledge and the application of that knowledge? Do you consider that something besides a science?
Well, yeah. So that sits in. Notice that it wasn't. The word knowledge needs to probably be defined, right? Like. Because we have sort of stunted what we would consider to be knowledge, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So let's just talk about so if this is true, if this definition fits, all right. So let's how do we distinguish between the science of the natural sciences and theology? How do we distinguish between them? Yes.
Their object.
Okay, their object. Which object? So now we're going to start being a little more philosophical in our definitions, right? When we talk about objects, what are the two things we talk about? So if we have something, we want to define it. There's two objects. What are they? Does anyone know?
Formal and material.
Formal and material object. All right. So we talked about that kind of last week. The formal object is Connor's on a roll, so we're just going to keep looking at Connor. The formal object is.
I interrupted Tyler. Did you?
No.
All right. So we'll start with it. The material object is the subject matter, what it's made of, what it is, right? And the object is the formal object is the sort of the angle we look at it from. Okay. So what would be the formal object of theology? Let's go with theology again. God. All right. And what's the material object?
Revelation.
Okay. So you flipped it, right? So the material object is the thing we're studying, right? And the formal is the way we go at it. So the material object is God, and the formal object is divine revelation. Okay. So that's where the definition for theology of faith-seeking understanding comes from. All right. And so let's go back to let's sort of back down. Why does there have to be a pecking order in the sciences? Anyone know? Like, so in other words, is theology a higher science than, say, metaphysics? Anyone know what metaphysics is? If I don't use that term? Okay, that's fine. Metaphysics. So metaphysics studies being as being itself. So things that exist as they exist. Okay? And its material object, too, is the first cause. Right? So reason takes us to a first cause. We call that first cause God. So metaphysics and theology have both the same formal object. But how do they differ? Same material object. How do they differ?
Different formal object.
They're different formal objects, right? And so metaphysics as its formal object has human reason, and theology has divine revelation. Okay, why is theology then higher?
Does that have to do with the proximity to the first cause?
No. Not directly. It's because the first principles are absolutely assured, right? So God, who can neither deceive nor be deceived. So what is revealed is absolutely sure. What is reasoned to still may be true, but we don't get the same level of surety or assurance. Okay. All right. So let's back all the way back down then. Okay. So we can see like why theology sits on top of metaphysics. Yes, Connor.
So that God can deceive or be deceived, is that just based upon the idea that God is truth and therefore the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, or what is?
Well,
I mean, God can't lie is what it's based upon, right? So he can't. So anything he says is absolutely true. Yes.
Can you explain what you mean by higher?
Yeah. So higher would be in its relation to being. So and this will make sense in a second. So if we look at natural science versus what we studied last week, natural philosophy, which one do you think is higher? Why?
Because everything in natural science is based off of principles of philosophy.
Okay, so that is part of it for sure, right? So we could go to first principles, but why else? Okay, so let's go. Let's talk a little bit about what is natural philosophy's material object.
Nature.
Okay, so what did we say last week specific about nature, though? You guys remember?
The ordering?
Not quite. What? So we look at nature and we see things changing all the time, right? And so we're trying to look within change what makes something what it is. All right. So what are the sort of underlying principles of stability? All right. So both natural philosophy and empirical science, or natural science, they have the same material object, right? They're both interested in looking at material creation, all right, and somehow looking at change within material creation, right? What does natural science use as its formal object?
Can you repeat that last
Yeah. So what's the formal object of natural science?
Efficient causes.
Not quite.
What do you mean by formal object?
Someone tell him since he came in late. What do I mean by formal object?
So material object is what the object is.
What the matter is.
The angle at which we...
Yeah, so formal object is the angle at which we study the...
Is it logic?
So logic would fall more under the formal... would fall more under the first principles.
Is it nature itself? Is it nature through?
Well, no, it's the accidents. You guys remember accidents, substance, and accidents, right? So what is it? What does natural science always try to study? Accidents to uncover what's going on underneath. Okay. Whereas natural philosophy abstracts the accidents to get at the essence or the nature of the thing. Okay. And so if we're studying natures, which would be the higher science? You'll see why this is important in a second. Natural philosophy or empirical science, which would be the highest?
Philosophy.
Why?
Because you're looking at what's in common of the natures instead of particular.
Yeah. So you guys remember the form versus matter distinction we talked about last week? So So if you were to look at the matter, the accidents, versus trying to uncover the form is ontologically prior to the matter, right? And this will all make sense when we get towards the end. I know I'm throwing a lot of terms out here, but I want you guys to begin. Remember, we talked about why we're doing this, right? So we have a vocabulary so that, we can even back up for a second, so that in the past 300 years, as natural science has sort of really sort of sprouted, there were no Aristotelian Thomistic scholars in the 17th century to answer Newton and his friends. Okay, and so Aristotle and St. Thomas got thrown out, and no one was able to see because some of Aristotle's natural science conclusions, something like spontaneous generation, for example, he just thought things just suddenly, because he couldn't explain them, right? So they said, okay, look, he's coming up with these ridiculous things, he's got to be totally off, right? But they looked at his empirical science instead of his natural philosophy, right? And so they never tested the principles, they just threw the principles out with him, all right? And so if science is going to serve, what's the purpose of all of this? Like, why do we even do any science?
To know, love, and serve God.
Yeah, like big picture, yeah, but just to know causes, right? To understand reality, okay? And so, ultimately, let's just back up, and then we'll get to the first principles part in just a second. Where does science, and I'll use science in the sort of narrow, so I don't have to keep saying empirical science or natural science. Where does it get its first principles from? So you guys understand when we talked about first principles, right? So first principles are just those things that you take as givens, you assume to be true, right? Everything has to have first principles. So if I don't have any first principle, I can't move at all, right? No foundation, no house on top, all right? Where does science get its first principles from?
Observation.
Okay, so observation, empirical data. I'm not going to answer the question just yet. I'm going to make you sort of sit with it for a minute, and then go ahead, Con.
Is it philosophy?
Yeah, so remember, that's the whole, I went on for like 10 minutes about the pecking order, right? So the higher give the first principles to the lower. All right, so where does physics get its first principles from?
Philosophy.
Well, math, right? Like, I assume that 2 + 2 = 4. Right? I can't test that. When I'm doing physics, I'm assuming that's the case. I'm like, when someone gets into a situation and they're doing physics and they're just not able to quite put an equation to what the phenomenon they're seeing, do they then go, you know what, math just doesn't work? Or do they go, no, my law is wrong, right? They never question the math. They question their law because the math is unquestionable. It's a first principle. All right? Now, there are mathematicians that can question that because then they rely on higher things, right? But they're handed the data. Like, it's like chemical engineers, right? Where do they get the first principles? Chemistry, right? Like, they don't question it, and they don't go back and go, well, chemistry is totally wrong about this. Yes?
It would also get first principles from everything that precedes.
Yeah. But just in this case, like just looking at where the questioning stops, all right? And what is the predominant philosophy today? You guys know this. What did Descartes set out to do? He set out to question everything, right? He's trying to find this method that would question everything. And in doing that, what did he do? He threw out first principles, right? All right. And then it's no wonder that then natural science did the same thing. All right. So let's back up. So then empirical science will get its first principles from natural philosophy, specifically. But then each thing above, right? And we'll see why, as we get to the end, when I have a couple of examples, we'll see why it borrows from metaphysics, it borrows from natural theology, and it borrows from theology itself, all right? And that's the correct way to get an understanding of things. Yes?
What would you call I think, therefore I am?
What would I call it? Stupid.
So, how would that differ from first principles?
Well, you guys want to unpack it for a second? Like, is this, I don't want to get us off on a tangent, but so that is what he thinks is his first principle, right? What is he really saying by that, though?
I cause my existence because of my thinking.
Well, what causes his existence? Not I cause it per se, but the fact that he thinks is what causes his. So he's saying the cause of his existence is thought, or the reason for his existence is thought, right?
Doesn't he say more that he knows he exists because he can think?
Well, so what is he saying about himself? He's saying that man is solely what?
In the head.
A thinking being, right? All right. So that's what man does, right? And so what follows from that? Let's think about some of the repercussions of.
There are not first principles in the world since it's outside of. So.
Okay. But what? Yeah. So what's the conclusion? Yes.
It's idealistic thinking, so therefore he thinks.
So you should use so it's idealism, right? And we're going to talk about that in a minute because that's what dominates modern science, right? And we'll see. I'll even give you a little test in a minute, and I'm going to reveal all of you as idealists. All right.
Wow.
Yep, every one of you.
Dang it.
I'm going to even make you vote and take a stand.
Oh, no.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about knowledge, right? So we're going back. We got off on a tangent. Now, surprisingly, I got off on a tangent. He says an organized body of knowledge. So knowledge. All right. And we're going to talk way more about knowledge when we get to epistemology. But I want to ask, so when we say knowledge, someone just sort of thinks, to know something, right? But what does it really mean to know something? All right, so what St. Thomas says, to know something means that the thing known is in the knower. So when I know the chair is actually becomes part of me, all right, in my thoughts. All right, and if you begin to now think about, like, biblically speaking, why a man knows his wife, why this makes sense. All right, so how does that possible? How can the chair become part of me without me ceasing to be me and the chair ceasing to be the chair? All right. So when we see something, okay, this is like a crash course in like how we come to know things. So I look at an individual material object, all right, and I can study it, but I look at it and I judge it, right? How do I judge it? Well, not negatively, but like how does it actually work? Right? So I look at the thing and I abstract the accidents from it in order to get down to what it is, to its nature. What it really, like, that's, to understand something is to know what it is, right? So if I want to know something, I have to know what it is, right? You encounter something in the world, you walk up to it and you go, the first question out of your mouth is, what is it, right? You don't just go, you just don't look at it and go, like, well, I have no idea what that is, right? Man by nature wants to know, right? Because he has this faculty that he has to know. So we look at something and our imagination draws up this image, and from that, our intellect abstracts the essence of it, okay, or the form of it, what the thing is, all right. And we now know what it is, all right. So I can look at that chair, and it doesn't have arms, it has a cushion. I can abstract all of that and go, that's a chair, because I know the nature of the chair. I know what it is, okay. So that's how we know things, right? But abstraction doesn't just happen on like just one level, okay? So it happens on 3 levels, okay? So there's 3 levels of abstraction. So first would be for me to look at the chair and I just sort of I abstract the specific matter, but I still know it's a material object. And I'm doing it so as to sort of study the world. Okay. Well, that's what physical science does. Right. So it's just one level. So in other words, I can. So if I say to you red, right? If I said the color red, all right. Can you abstract that from material reality completely? No, right? Because immediately, what did you do? You thought of a red object, right? And so to study things like that, qualities of things, that's what natural science is for. All right, and then we can back up a level of abstraction. Okay, and we can go, okay, well, what if I'm just worried about the quantity of the thing, how big it is, where its location is, and all that, right? That's where mathematics comes in. All right, that's where you can leave behind all of everything is sensible except some quantitative aspect of it. Okay, so when is quantity the only way you can know something, though? Because things have qualities too, right? Like a red shirt has quality. It's red, right? That's not. I can't quantify that. But very often, modern science tries to do that, right? What do they talk about? They talk about it being like a spectrum of light. That's quantifying something that's a quality. All right. All right. So the second level of mathematics, second level of abstract, is mathematics. Let me get back to where I was. All right. And the third is the highest level of abstraction, and that's where we do metaphysics to uncover the nature of the thing and where it fits in the world of being. Okay. All right. So what St. Thomas says is that you rank the sciences according to the level of abstraction. Okay. All right. So everybody sort of understand how we come to know things. Right. We sort of got that right. Okay. All right. So let's take a little talk about first principles. Okay. All right, so remember the definition, we said it was based upon first principles. What's a principle?
Something that can't be proven.
A principle is just some intellectual foundation upon which thought and everything just sort of builds, right? And so every science we already talked about has to borrow first principles from a higher science. All right, so that's pretty, yes?
So I'll come back at the end of the slide here to answer my question.
Okay. All right. So let's just talk about just general first principles, unquestionable things that we all believe. All right. All right. So there is what's called the principle of identity. Each being is what it is and not another. All right. So putting words to these sometimes makes it more complicated than it is. But even a 3-year-old knows, I want ice cream. I hand him a piece of broccoli. He says, that's not ice cream. I want ice cream. Right? Principle of identity. Right. How do we know these things, by the way?
They're assumed.
Somebody said it. Somebody said experience, right? So, in other words, everyone knows what self-evident means? Self-evident just means that once I know the definition of the terms, I know what it means. I don't need to be explained. It doesn't have to be explained to me. So this is important because this principle of identity, we'll see in a minute why it's important. It just means that that a thing exists as something and not something else, right? And it's not just this homogeneous blob of things put together, okay? It actually has existence and it has a form, okay? All right, so the principle, sometimes hear this called the principle of non-contradiction. So it's nothing can be both affirmed and denied of the same subject at the same time in the same respect. All right, we see this all the time, right? You're like, okay, you're contradicting yourself. It can't be both those things, okay? It's impossible for a thing to be both be and not be at the same time and in the same respect. All right, the law of excluded middle. Don't worry about this for right now because we're going to have examples of these. I just want to sort of lay them out here. The law of excluded middle just says a thing cannot be and not be. To become something, it has to have been something, right? This is the one we talked about a lot last week when we said from nothing comes nothing, right? You can't get anything from, all right? All right, and then the principle of sufficient reason. Again, we'll talk about this in a minute. Everything that is, insofar as it is, has a sufficient reason for its being.
Is that like reason in the sense of something caused it to exist?
Yeah, so when we use reason, we would, it doesn't have to be that. So think about the wall. The color of the wall has some cause, right? It didn't cause itself to be red.
Okay.
Okay? Everything has a cause.
Which cause are we talking about here?
It could, well, most of the time when you use this, it's when we're talking about efficient causes. You guys remember the 4 causes? Okay, the efficient cause is the thing that comes from the outside and has some activity and gives it to it, right? So the paintbrush couldn't give that wall red color until it had what? Red, right? So it can't just get red by itself, and it has to have an efficient cause, and that cause has to have red. That's what principle sufficient reason has. You can't give what you don't have. All right, think of it that way. All right, and you can sort of see where we might use that in an example. All right, here comes your test. Are you ready?
Oh no.
That's a rock. I wanted to bring like an actual rock, but I didn't have my stuff together, so I just used a picture. What is that rock made of?
Rock.
Well, substantially minerals, I guess.
All right, so I got minerals. How many people say minerals? See, yeah, you guys are all intimidated now because I said it was a test. I was gonna make you out to be something you're not. Yes, Father, what do you think it is?
That's kind of great.
Oh, so minerals. What else?
All right. Can we only give the material, or is there more to the question of what it's made out of beyond?
Connor, I can't give you that answer. But you have to search within yourself and go, what do I really believe this is made out of? Not because you're intimidated. I'm gonna ream you, make you look silly.
This particular rock is made of
Yeah.
pixels.
So what is it? What if that rock was sitting right in front of us? What would it be made of? I don't want to hear pixels. Like that's out. Pixels is out.
I gave the only wrong answer.
So go ahead and give like what you think is the obvious answer. Like what if you were sitting in a class? What would they say the rock was made of?
Really hard dirt.
Atoms or molecules or whatever, right?
That's what it is.
Okay, so it's made of molecules. But you guys, as blossoming philosophers, how would you answer that? What would you say it's actually made of?
Form and matter.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
So it's made out of form and matter. Why am I being so like coy about? Why does it matter? Why does matter matter? Like what? Why do we have to say it's made of form of matter? Right. So it's matter in the form of a rock. Right. It has rock form, whatever that is, like some immaterial thing that the matter that draws the matter to itself.
I mean, the matter can't fully describe it on its own. So
Certainly, like if I just told you it was a bunch of molecules, how is it different from another rock? How is it different from my car? How is it different? Yes. Go ahead, Tyler.
So aren't these just categories of like things that are different anyway? That have somewhat different form anyway?
So how are you using the word form? So your answer might be yes if you're using it correctly.
I'm not sure.
Go ahead, Connor. I'll let you think about it. But what you said was true, but I don't think you knew it was true. Like they do have different form. Things have different form.
Like they're different stuff, different things.
Well,
I guess
different. So thing is another good word to use, right? We talked about. So we would say that rock sitting next to another rock, they're different substances, right? And a substance is just a thing, some individual existing type of thing. Yes. Go ahead, Kevin.
So,
Kevin.
okay, so going back to that example, let's say you had two pictures of rocks, you put them up there, and they're distinct by their matter. Okay, so that obviously the matter that is in that rock is not in the other rock. But their form is just the nature of a rock. And all rocks have the same nature, correct? Like all rocks are rocks.
Yep.
So the individuality is coming from the fact that it's the matter.
Yeah, so Connor just said that matter is the individuating principle. So what it makes an individual thing a thing, right? All of you have human nature. Why aren't you all just mind melding right now? Like, why aren't we just a blob of human nature? Because we have different matter, right? That's it, right? So angels, for example, have no matter. What does that mean?
They have different natures.
They have different natures, right? That's why St. Thomas says angel is not a nature. There's just a hierarchy of angels, all with different natures. Because they have the same nature, what would they be? They'd be identical, nothing to separate them, right? So matter is what separates two things. Yes.
What happens when we die and we don't have matter?
Okay, that's a weird. We can talk about that actually at the end, but I don't even want to go there. Like that will get us so far off the trail because that would be beyond a human reason answer, right? That we can give. Yes.
I'm super lost because we're using matter and form and like what's on sense of what's on this slide versus the physical, more scientific. Could you define matter and form?
Yeah. So let's just use an example actually, and it'll help with the matter. All right. So water. All right. What is the matter of water? So hydrogen and oxygen. So if I grab water somehow and I could look at what it was made of, I would see hydrogen and oxygen. So you told me some ingredients that got mixed together, and a cake. Cake is a great example, right? When I put the egg in the cake and I mix it with milk and then the cake batter, where's the milk? Can I extract the milk anymore? No. So some substantial change has happened, right? So think of this water in this. This is why this is like really has to get you thinking, not to think in terms of molecules, or not to think in terms because matter is just the stuff it's made out of. But because if it's in pieces, right? How do you make that? How is that rock a single thing? Right. So in other words, is it a single thing or is it 10,000 things? Like let's just suppose there's 10,000 atoms in it or molecules or whatever. Is it one thing or 10,000 things?
One thing.
Okay. So what makes it one thing? The form, right? Like the cake becomes one thing because I'm making a cake. It's in the form of a cake. All right. So this is like really important for us to understand. All right. That, and it may not sink in the very first time. All right. But as you begin to think about the way things are, because what is the conclusion that I get? Let's just go from water. Like if I look at water and I go, it's just two hydrogen atoms bonded with an oxygen atom, right? What did I just do? I reduced it to its parts, right? And there's this reductionism in the world that just says that's just nothing but, right? And that nothing but is one of the causes, but we said to know something, you have to know all four causes, right? So it told you something about what the material cause is, all right? But it didn't tell you what the formal cause is, what it is, right? So in other words, when I analyze something, I pull it apart, right? What's the next step after I pull it apart? Synthesize it and put it back together. Where does it fit together? What is the whole thing I'm looking at, and where does it fit in the world? Does modern science do that?
I feel like there's this like drive, like with I don't know what the particle physics is still like, or like string theory that like, if we just keep paring it down, eventually we'll find some kind of like objective thing that we can understand, and then that will explain everything, and then we don't need religion. Like that's kind of like that seems to be kind of like the drive. Yeah, I mean, there's some of like I don't know that like there's certainly some of that, but I don't know the average person because I've heard Catholic scientists explain things, and I've heard them say things like colors. I think we talked about this last week. Colors don't exist in the world. It's just how light hits your eye. So that wall really isn't red, but it's just the way that the colors bouncing off of and I'm not a physicist, the colors bouncing off the wall. All right, so where's the thing then? Where's the redness? It's moved in here, right? But then what this does is creates this sort of disconsonance where experience doesn't match our theories. Because if I turn off the light and can't see the wall anymore, is it still red? Right. Does a person who's walking around red-green color blindness, red not exist? So red must be something out in the world, right? So that's why it's important, okay? Because it has to do with how we come to know things. Because red-green color blindness is a privation, right? I have the potency to do it, but it's never reduced to act. All Right? So I have the potential to see red, but there's an impediment there for me to actually see red. All right? So that's why they say, go ahead.
So how would you define a privation?
So privation would be...
Can it only be something like that is missing, or can it be the other way around too?
No, it would be, so do we say that that a rock can't see? Like, do we expect a rock to be able to see? Why? Because it's not in its nature, right? So that's not a privation. Now, a person walking around who can't see, what do we say? They're blind, right? Because their matter, their form, their nature says that is a seeing type of creature who has a privation that can't see. So he has some potency that hasn't been reached, some potential that hasn't been actualized. Yes?
So how would you talk about, like there's the shrimp in the ocean that can see 17 different colors or whatever it is. Would your point basically be that the color is still there even though we can't see it? Or that the thing is there even though we can't?
Yeah, our senses aren't, we can't see there can be a color spectrum and us not be able to see. You could, red-green colorblind is a great example, right? Like, they can see some of the colors.
But it's not a privation for humans not to be able to see.
Humans have certain eyesight.
Yeah.
Whatever 20/20 vision equates to in a shrimp, I have no idea. But they don't have the same vision, right? That's the idea. Yes, Connor?
Could you say that, so let's go back to the wall example. Light, goes from there, hits the wall, hits my eye. Could you say that the redness was in the light and that the wall causes substantial change to the light, but, it can't give what it doesn't have, so it has to be red in order to give redness to the light?
Wow.
Well,
Connor, I love your self-answering questions, by the way. Those are great. More of those, please.
Physically, the color is there, but it's not, alone until it's not, distinct.
What do you mean by that? So unpack that for a second.
The red color is already there, but the other stuff is absorbed and that's reflected. The red color is coming from the light source, but it's reflected.
Yeah, but aren't you just doing the same thing when you say that I did with the rock made out of the molecules? Aren't you so dissecting the nature of red into some other sort of pieces that it's no longer red? So in other words, you've taken away the form that is red and made it into just pieces of light. You see what I'm saying? So in other words, then you keep carrying that forward and red no longer exists. So that's how maybe red works in light, but it's not the explanation of red itself. That's only part of the explanation. And it's part of the explanation of how we see what is red. All right. Again, this is so I understand that this is, and we'll tie it together later and we'll see why, being able to do this, especially the stage you guys are at, to go out into the world and go, oh, I actually really understand first principles, and so you're better scientists. You're better, because you're not spinning your wheels trying to work on things that aren't true. Okay? Yes, Kevin?
So, I guess it seems kind of so the form determines what the thing can do, but it seems kind of the way we would come to know the form is sort of through the matter, through the accident.
Oh, absolutely. That's why science is necessary, right?
I look at the rock and I'm okay, it has this certain shape, it looks like that, and then I can say, okay, I'm pretty sure that's a rock, and I've seen these before, and I've seen what they can do, and so I can reasonably conclude that this is indeed a rock.
Yes.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean that I can just look, but I don't know, it doesn't mean I can just see the rock and know everything about rocks ever and
Yeah, so that's the interesting part, right? So we don't know everything about anything.
Yeah.
Right? Can you tell me how a sweet potato grows in the ground? Can you describe to me the process? Not really, right? We have a little bit of an idea, right? Because there's a lot going on. Right? So yeah, but that as you move, right, your understanding grows and grows and grows. You understand the thing better and better and better and better. But we don't comprehend anything, right? And that's, again, comprehension means to know something fully.
But our guardian angels comprehend all natural things?
Yes. Angels can comprehend all if the knowledge if the knowledge of those things have been infused in them, then yes. Yes, Jason.
If each angel has a unique nature and they exist on a hierarchy, does that mean some people have better guardian angels than other people?
Yes. Yeah, there's a story of a person who could see guardian angels. Father Josh is smiling because I think he knows the story too. There's there's this lady who could see guardian angels, and she was at World Youth Day when John Paul II was there, and she saw this like 4-story tall guardian angel standing beside him. So obviously they have to be, right? Like some people's guardian angels are more powerful than others. That's just the reality of it, because they can't be equal. There is no equality in heaven. I hate to tell you. All right.
So your guardian angel doesn't. Do they all understand all natural things, or they don't know all of nature?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they know. I don't know that I could say that they comprehend all natural things. I think you could probably say that because it's beneath them, but I don't know.
But at the judgment, we'll comprehend all natural things.
Yeah, well, we have the capacity to. Whether we actually will or not is another question. Like, it can't be proven. Yeah. So we have. That's why we have the desire to know all things, right? Is because we have the capacity to do it. Now, how that actually works out, I don't know. All right. All right. So we already sort of talked a lot about where I was going. Yes, Connor.
This might be an entirely different topic that you want to talk about. But how does that factor in intellect? Because like you say, intellect is a spiritual faculty and affects our ability to know. So how does that play? Like, is it someone who has a greater intellect can just know more? Can they know quicker?
Yes and yes. So the way we know things, though, is through synthesis, right? So God knows only one thing, right? Himself. And because he knows himself, he knows everything in that. So he has one principle, right? Himself. And he knows all things. And so when you really understand something, it's broken down to a single principle, right? And then everything else, you just get connected to that principle. So that's why you talk about knowledge is simple. That's what they mean. Like the greater you know something, the less you know. Like the less you have to do to sort of synthesize it. Okay. All right. Let me think about where I was going here. All right. So I don't know if I mentioned this already. So at the beginning, we may or may not have talked about, because I don't remember, that there was no such thing as sort of empirical science 600 years ago. For a simple reason that it was just part of natural philosophy, right? It's just a way that you came to know, study causes, right? Study causes in the natural world. It's later on when sort of that gets separated, that you start seeing like empirical science is really as a separate field. Okay, like Aristotle, St. Thomas, all of them. They knew a whole lot of science, right? Now, did they get it all right? No, of course not. They just went off of what they had for the day. But the point is that natural science always leads to less of a degree of certainty than philosophy. Okay, and that kind of is almost countercultural to say that. Why can I say that? Why is what I just said true?
Going back to the beginning of today, you said the first principles of the empirical stuff is based off of what we have concluded in philosophical matters. So it's like the philosophical matters are like I do the rock foundation where the empirical that is built, the house built on top of that. So we can pretend like our house is some foundational, but if our rock is actually sand, then it's not.
Yeah, so the rejection of first principles has something to do with it. But by its nature, it's less certain because it's based upon experiment, right? Like, it's an inductive way. So you guys remember different induction and deduction? Right? Induction takes a specific thing and tries to make some universal principle out of it. Science takes a couple of different specific things, samples them, however it does it, and then tries to formulate a law on that, right? That in and of itself is always less certain than deduction. Okay? Everyone sort of grasp that? Why? Like, science doesn't give you certain things. They're only probabilistic. All right? And thus we see scientific laws changing all the time. They're fine-tuned, whatever. Like, we're going to use an example in a little bit. Yes, Connor.
So I'm taking a class basically, we're going through the French Enlightenment right now, and one of the philosophers I mean basically is talking about this exact thing where he raised the objection in which he said, if you look at something like geometry, arithmetic, there's no question. Like there's someone who believes in geometry or understands geometry would not call themselves a Euclidean or something like that. Where it's like, with philosophy, you look at all this stuff where you have sex in religion, you have sex in whether you're an atomist or I don't know. So, what would you have as a good argument for how to say that just because there's disagreement among people? I mean, I think it's a bad argument because people that came before him disagreed with him, which disproves his own point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's your argument, right? So, just because someone disagrees doesn't mean there's not truth, right? Because there's plenty of things that we could all disagree about. We could sit here and disagree this very simply, like that there's someone sitting in the chair outside. Right? We could just sit here and we could argue about it, we could disagree about it, but that doesn't mean that there's either not someone sitting in the chair or there is. Right? So that's a common thing, like the nobody can know argument, right? Like, well, maybe you can. Yeah, I mean, maybe we haven't found a way to go look at it. Maybe we haven't done the necessary intellectual legwork to do it. Whatever. But yeah, I think that's the argument. The argument simply is disagreement doesn't mean there isn't a truth. In fact, why do I disagree about anything?
Because you think someone is wrong.
Yeah, because you think there's a truth, right? Like, if we sat here for 20 minutes and disagreed on whether vanilla ice cream was better than chocolate ice cream, how many of you guys would get up and leave? Yeah, most of you, right? Like, I hope. Like,
I didn't get up and leave for the other thing.
Yeah. So, like, why? Well, because there's no way we can determine the truth of that. So I think JT is saying, I want to at least try. So I know where your heart is. Briars? Is it Briars?
I don't want to get into it.
Okay.
I
think objectively Briars. I think we can say Briars.
I think like I've been hit with this too. It's like I'll be like, this is the truth, and they'll be like, well, just because you say that doesn't mean it's the truth,
Yeah, anyone who has kids will agree with that, right?
That whole thing, and it's like, yeah, I mean, right? If I say something doesn't happen, I'm not God, but that doesn't mean that I can still declare with certainty, that this is true.
Yeah. Well, this is why something like relativism is absurd, right? Because people still argue. Like, if truth is really subjective, why bother arguing? It's like you're wasting your time. So, I mean, there's truth, and then there's demonstration of truth. Two totally different things. I can know something is true. But I maybe can't prove it, right? This part of that is, like, as Catholics, understanding that the gift of faith gives you knowledge, right? But theology gives you understanding, right? So you begin to understand the truths that are revealed that you know are true, but you can't necessarily defend them. You don't necessarily understand them completely. You can't explain them, but you know something is true, right? Yes.
So you said mathematics are certain science, nobody would 2 plus 2 equal to 4 is certain, right? So in that sense, why isn't science certain?
Because it's taking that abstracted just some quantity from a nature, right? So it looks at a thing and it just looks at quantity, and I'm really tempted to kind of ding you and say that 2 plus 2 isn't always 4, only because here's why, right? Because have you ever programmed and you're like, if x equals 1, then do this, right? And some floating point issue comes up where it's not really ever, it's not 1, right? And you start looking at you're trying to look at it in bit form. You're trying to figure out why isn't this working? It should work, right? And it's because 1 isn't equal to 1, right? So my point is not that 2 plus 2 in principle isn't 4, but that when we start to try to measure, there's always some degree of uncertainty, right? So I can always measure more accurately, right? If nothing else, right, I can always, this is measured in inches. Well, what if you measure it in half inches? Or or in centimeters? Can you get a more precise? So it allows for more and more precision, right?
But that's only the problem of the experiment, right? My question is more of even if the world hadn't existed, would 2 plus 2 still be equal to 4?
Yeah, so 2 plus 2 is 4 by it's very nature.
Because if human beings hadn't existed, also 2 plus 2 would be 4. Right? So it's not a something of our understanding.
Yeah, so it's the method of science, not the subject matter. So there is a truth to all those things, right? There is a truth to the rate at which the universe is expanding, or maybe it's not expanding. Like there is a truth to those things, but we're always limping for an absolutely precise measurement because it's not possible. Yes.
Isn't that why with science you deal with theories? There's no absolute truth with anything except the scientific method itself, and so as you find different theories, you've got changes in different thought processes. That's why we don't have like spontaneous generation before. Because before we had lots of evidence backing it up until you have one experiment go, ding, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Move on to the next.
Yeah. So yes, the answer to your question is yes. But so if you ask 1,000 scientists what the scientific method is, right? You'll get, I don't think you'll get 1,000 different answers. You get a lot of different answers, right? And that's because the scientific method works as a method. That's why it's called a method. But it's often treated as if it's the only path to knowledge. And the problem with doing that is it's self-refuting because you can't use the scientific method to prove the scientific method, right? That's when it becomes problematic. When it becomes when it becomes a philosophical thing rather than a methodological thing for science. Yes, Connor.
Is the fact that 2 is just a quantity abstract from that, is that why people would debated like whether 0 was an actual thing?
Probably. I mean, people debate it. I don't know. I don't like. Like history of mathematics is not my. Like I'm a statistician, but man, like I can't geek out on that. Like it's too much.
It depends on the frame of reference, but since I majored in math, 0 is a first principle in at least some number systems.
Okay, I knew you would know, dude.
Yeah.
Totally.
Some, I think.
Okay. All right. So science by nature is always going to have some incertitude, and it's built in. Okay, it's built in as a method because it's trying to study formulas instead of forms, right? Oh, that's pretty catchy. All right, so I guess you guys didn't think so. I thought it was pretty good just coming off the cuff. All right, so I think we've already talked a little bit about this. So the idea where where color is not in the thing but in the eye came from Isaac Newton. I don't know that I want to add it. We sort of beat this horse to death. He's saying stop. Okay. All right. So the take home of that again is that reality is outside of us. All right, and that ideas are. Well, so here we go. Here's the question: are ideas means or ends?
What's an idea?
What's it? So an idea is our grasp on some. Well, I'm already giving it away because I'm trying to. I can't give a definition that doesn't give the answer away. But it's our intellectual. It's an idea is the light shed upon something.
I was the light shed upon that.
Yeah. Well, you have to answer my question first. You can't ask for a definition.
What's your question?
You taught us always to ask for that.
Yeah, in this case, the definition will give away the answer. So you got to come up with your own definition. So our ideas means or ends? Let me say means. Means to what?
Other ideas.
Yeah, means to understand. Means to truth. Means to understanding. Right? They're not ends. Right? If I'm an idealist, what are ideas? Ends. Right? Yes, Connor.
Okay, so when we think of ideas, like you said, we can never know something fully. So I look at a chair and I have this idea of what a chair is, and it's in some way flawed. I don't truly know what that chair is. If I somehow knew what a chair was, I knew its nature, is that still an idea or is that something else?
No, because, okay, so we didn't actually, I never finished this thought about the thing known being in the knower. Did I finish that thought?
No.
Or did I get off on a track? So that's really important, right? So when I know something, when I abstract it, the form becomes part of me. So I abstract all of the accidents, everything away from it, and now the thing is inside of me, the form of it is inside of me, right? So I know the thing because it's in me, right? So that's the idea. All right, so go back and now ask your question again. because I want to make sure that I had that.
Well, so I didn't ask a question after that. So,
Okay.
But it's not like, so you're saying I look at something, I abstract, and then I have this form of a chair. But do I know the form of a chair?
Well, the chair is now part of you, right? In a certain sense, right? So the form of chair is now in you, right? And that's the amazing thing about abstraction, right? Is that this form that exists in this individual thing now also exists in me, and I'm still me, right? And so this. Go ahead now. Now, what's your second half of the question? I was going to get us off on a bad tangent.
But because somebody who is mentally ill, okay? They think chairs can float. They have this idea of a chair. They looked at a chair and said, yes, that thing can float. Their idea, the form of their chair in their head does not square with the nature of a chair in reality. Okay, so you're saying like the form we have of our head doesn't necessarily have to square with.
No, ideas can be right or wrong, right?
Okay.
Yeah, ideas can be right or wrong. They can be comprehensive, or they can be, because in that they have something right about the nature of the chair, right?
So if I have a correct idea of a chair, and God infused knowledge into me what a chair was.
Use comprehensive.
I comprehend the chair. Is that still a means, or is that an end?
It would still be a means because now you're using chair to know what.
Got it.
Yeah, it's still a means to know, like ultimate causes, right? The ultimate cause of the chair. Right. So you once you really know the chair, you can know like who made it, but then you can know who made the guy who made the chair. Right. All right. All right. So I think I've also exhausted this as a topic about being aware of the fact that. Remember that the difference between idealism and realism, right? We talked about this. Idealism says that. What's the difference? Somebody tell me what's the difference between realism and idealism?
Idealism says everything exists in our head, and realism says it exists outside of our head.
Right, and so that our ideas are just ways in which we access those things outside of our head. Okay, so reality is real. It's outside of us, right? The real, remember we even defined the word real. Real is outside, what is outside of us. Okay, yes?
A useful thing that I got to use the other day. If you're having an argument with someone who you think might be an idealist, mention climate change.
Why?
Because they really don't like that a certain political party doesn't believe in climate change. But if they're an idealist, then they have to accept that. So you can use the arguments that they share your philosophy in to show them why their philosophy doesn't work, which can be really useful.
All right, so let's. All right, so I think we've done enough. Like I'm seeing some cross-eyed. I think we've done enough of like terms and stuff. Let's look at some examples. All right.
Because that's where it got easier last time.
Yeah.
Did you leave before that?
Yeah, I think you left before the chaos ensued.
That was good.
Yeah.
It was the second best discussion we've ever had in here.
Yeah. All right. So I picked two. You can probably guess which two they are: the Big Bang and evolution. All right. Not to be just really settled, easy questions for us to talk about. All right. So my question for you: can we prove the world had a beginning?
No.
According to him, no.
So St. Thomas, that's St. Thomas. He's writing in 1205 or something like that. Probably that part of the city. He says no. Has that changed? Can we prove that the world has a beginning?
No.
People disagreed with Thomas then, and people disagreed with the Big Bang.
It hasn't really. Well, here's the thing. Okay, like even with the Big Bang, some people that will say, well, maybe there was something else before them. Maybe it's some, going back and forth, whatever. So the answer is it hasn't changed.
Okay.
In that sense, I mean, you can. What can be? I mean, if you may not everyone accepts the Big Bang starters, but even with that, that's. I mean, that's just that's a point, not like what you would consider an ultimate beginning automatically.
Okay.
You can prove it has a first cause, but not a beginning. They're not the same thing.
Yeah. Everyone's shaking their head at that one. All right.
What did he say?
What if, so I'm
first
just going to throw this
cause,
question out there, we won't answer it yet, we'll answer it at the end when we have, what if, though, it doesn't have a beginning, can I still prove it has a first cause?
Yes.
Because you still have to answer the question of why is there existence at all?
Okay. Yes, Todd?
If it didn't have a beginning, wouldn't its first cause be itself? So therefore,
I don't know, what do you guys think? I will answer that question, but I want to dive just a little bit into.
So I think it's nuanced, where we tend to confuse causal chains with time. So there's no reason that God couldn't have created a universe where time doesn't have like a definitive starting point, right? Because you like the argument from first cause that St. Thomas has doesn't depend on time. It depends on like what holds a thing in existence. What is the cause of its existence?
Okay, so we're going to unpack that in a second too. Connor, were you going to ask something?
Well, I was going to say, science, our knowledge of science is going to the point where I think you have access to things that he doesn't have, such as like the law of, the second law of thermodynamics.
Entropy?
Entropy. Yeah, so if the entropy universe is always increasing, and the universe has always existed, why is the universe still around?
Okay. All right, so let's try to unpack this a little bit. How many of you guys are like science type nature? Okay, so you can't, if I butcher science, I'm going to expect you to say something to me, all right? Because we are teetering really close to my, outside of my groove here. All right, so the answer to the question is, first of all, St. Thomas said, this is what he said, and then we'll see if we can back it up too. He said that it's a matter of faith that the universe has a beginning. Right? That's it. That's in his day, and we'll see if it's still true today. And it was a revealed truth, and not something reason could prove. All right.
You know, Aquinas' day didn't it was even more radical than that. Like everyone thought that the universe existed forever. Like all the great.
Non-Christian. Yes.
I mean, with the.
You got to remember, he's in the midst of Christendom too, right? So the Christian worldview is pretty much entrenched. Go ahead.
Yes. So that would have been, but compared to some much more distant philosophy, in time or just geographically distant philosophies. Yeah, that would be because there are groups of thought or have been that say that everything has always existed.
All right, so let's see what we can do. Right, so notice I ask it to be proven by reason, but I'm still going to use science. Okay, I'm still going to use science. But what's the caveat with even if we use the Big Bang? What's the caveat? At best, it's just a probable argument. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about just as much history as I can give of this without exposing the fact that I'm an idiot. Wow. All right, so Newton comes along, and this is where sort of the Christian understanding of the universe is sort of entrenched. And he comes along and he looks at space and time, and he says they're absolutes, right? And that matter, if the universe is expanding, matter keeps getting created, and so therefore posits that the universe does not have a beginning or an end. All right. And then Einstein comes along, and he finds that space and time actually bend, and that the universe is in fact expanding. Am I doing good so far? Okay. And then there's this Catholic priest who says, wait, the universe is expanding. Ooh, maybe it contracts. Maybe if I go backwards, what happens, right? And that's what the Father George Lemaitre does. He goes back and he says, okay, well, if it's expanding, I bet mathematically I could make it contract and go back to a single point. And that's what he does. And Einstein looks at it and thinks, wow, this is pretty cool. And of course the Catholic priest says, well, look, here's proof of revelation. That, so is that proof?
I think I might have a reason why. I guess I was watching Nova, and they were talking about this kind of stuff. But I guess one physicist had a theory of how there had been many Big Bangs. So there's and I guess his theory, as far as he has it, probably could work. And so it like would expand and then contract and then expand and then contract, and so it's theoretically, I guess, still possible that it could have existed forever.
Yeah. So when he goes back, and this could be exactly where I started butchering.
And
So when he,
like the accordion universe or whatever.
yeah. So when he goes back, and he keeps going back, and he gets the universe down to this single point, right? And why can't he go back any further? Because the principles of mathematics break down at that point, right? So he can't say for sure that there was nothing before that. He can only say that we have no tools to measure that thing, whatever was before that. All right. So at best, the Big Bang is probabilistic, right? And seems to be pretty good, right? But someone will come along and find that it needs to be tuned in some way. Maybe they'll find that, oh wait, the universe is not, dark matter isn't what we thought it was, or whatever, right? Or we think we know what dark matter is, and look, this explains it. Okay, so science will always keep sort of coming up with. So you can't use the Big Bang to prove that the world was created. All right, the only thing you can use to prove it is Scripture. But let's just play a little game, all right? And because this will let us. What if the world is without beginning? All right, does this do anything to our belief in God? Right, because you see people will go, well, you can't have a Big Bang without a Big Banger, right? And then, or they'll come up with the idea of a multiverse or the accordion universe, all these things. That's why you can't totally rely on it, right? Is it problematic for us to if for some reason we didn't have revelation, is it problematic for us to say, well, even if the universe is without beginning, there's still a God, all right? And that's what we're going to do. Okay. So first of all, notice I don't say the universe is eternal. Why do I not say that?
Because eternity is not the experience of time.
Yeah. So time and eternity are not. Eternity isn't just time without beginning or end, right? Eternity is only God is eternal, and eternity is now. Like it's just an eternal now. All things at once. Okay. The fullness of existence, all at once. All right, so we're in time, and we don't fully exist at any point in time, right? Like I'm still not what I'm going to be in 10 minutes from now, whatever. You're not. You all will be dumber in 10 minutes. You're not there yet. So there's always a potency that hasn't been reduced to act. So, and what are potency and act measures of? Change, right? Remember we talked about change was just the movement from potency to act, right? And how do we measure change? Time, right? So if the universe is without beginning, does that mean it's without time? No, right? Because what do we see? We're in it. What do we see? Change, right? Yeah. What we see. So let's talk a little bit about, because we've visited this before, and I know it's something you all like to unpack a little bit about time. Okay, so time, here is St. Thomas's definition. Time is nothing else but the number of motion, and now we know what motion means, right? Change, in respect to before and after. For we perceive time, as was said, when we number the before and after in motion. Therefore, it is clear that time is not motion. Time isn't change, it's just a measure of it, right? But it's consequent upon motion insofar as it is numbered. Hence, time is the number of motion. Is time objective or subjective?
Oof. A little bit of both.
Objective in the sense that it's not like dependent on the mind.
Right, but relativity is like it kind of messes around a little bit.
So when Joshua stopped the sun, did time stop?
No, change still happened.
How did it move? How did time still move if the sun didn't move?
Other things were still changing.
We don't measure, or time itself is not measured off the
sun. Yeah, so time is not the ruler, right? Like time is not, we measure by the sun. So there's some objective thing that we pick the movement of the sun, or the movement of the earth around the sun. Sorry for the, still stuck way back. way back. So,
geocentricity.
Yeah, by the end, you're all going to be geocentrists. Yeah, you will be done. I'm totally going to deliver on that. I promise. All right. So we use the sun because there are a few accidental changes in the sun itself. It's reliable, right, for us to use. But time is both objective outside of us and inside of us. Where does before exist? In your mind, right? And where does after exist? Where does later exist? Does it?
I mean, when you're thinking about like the future,
Say that again, Laura. Say it. Nice and loud.
Potential.
Yeah, so it exists in potency, right? Then we're using words. It exists in potency. Yeah,
we're using words.
Yeah, we're using big words. Big. So the future does not yet exist, right? But it is still a real thing in the sense that it exists in potency, even if not in actuality. All right. So then time is a measure of change. Does now exist?
Yeah.
Like right now.
What?
Yeah.
Not anymore.
It exists in your mind.
So you see a little bit of the problem, right, with time just in general, right, with the idea of now. So why does what Connor said kind of right, kind of wrong? So a point. How many of your math? Well, physics should be addressed.
Oh yeah, this is great.
So with a point, if I have a point, is it on a line?
Yes.
Yes.
What space are you working in?
Let's just say I'm just working in linear space.
Okay. Yes.
A point is part of the line?
No.
Okay. So a point is not. So explain how that could be, Junko. That it could be on a line but not part of the line.
So, ouch. How do I put this in simple words? You can't measure a point, and this is just properties of numbers, basically.
Okay, you could probably just stop right there because now you just answer what Connor said. We can just leave it at that. I don't want to get totally confused.
Okay.
You cannot measure a point, right? So you can't measure now. So it's St. Thomas calls it something. I think he calls it the flowing now, and so that's why we do things like put time together in certain intervals, like 10 minutes, seconds, whatever, right? So that we can somehow grasp the point, put it on a line, and get something of its neighbors, all right? So a point can only be the beginning or an end of a line. It can sit on a line, but never be part of the line. Okay? Yes, Connor?
Does that mean philosophically we disagree with the idea that there's a minimum unit of time?
No, not necessarily. Because it's just a time as a measurement. Yeah, there could be. I guess. I mean, in theory, there should be, right? Because it's some limit going to.
So it's not. It has to be discrete somewhere.
Yeah. So time is discrete, right? We treat it as continuous, but it's really discrete. It's just now, all right? And the reason why I'm going into this in depth is because with God, like that's how God sees all things at once, right? Because He sees the line, right? He just looks at the line because He's not a part of the line, okay? And that's eternity. Eternity is being able to do that, the fullness of being all at once. All right. All right. So let's go back to.
Can you go back to the time? So.
Go back in time.
Still confused about what you said. Like you can't identify now, but you can only identify an interval. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, in essence, yes.
Well, I mean, thinking about now is an interval. So.
Yeah. Like nothing. Like it's gone the second it. Like not even the same. I'm trying to use the second. Like it's gone. Period. That's it. Like. It now exists in another form.
By the time you said now, it's no longer now.
Yeah. So.
I think you were about to say.
So the thing is to always think of it as something discrete, right? So it's always something behind you. It's just another, like each time is a step forward instead of some continuous interval, and we just make it continuous so that we can talk about it.
Could it still be continuous? Or no?
I mean, in essence, yeah, because like the before and after, before is continuous, right? That's why it has like it's a measurement of before and after. If you're if you're sort of confused, that's how time works. Like honestly, like it's one of those things that like to try to grasp time while you're floating in it is a little difficult, right? Like the fish trying to understand all the qualities of water when he's in it is very difficult, right? All right, so let's go to in this. John Claude was a little bit doing this already. Don't worry about the length of this. Like you guys know, my slides are just for later on. So remember, we're trying to get. Does it matter that whether the world has a beginning or not? All right. And well, it doesn't matter, but does it matter for the existence of God? All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend a few minutes talking about, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about the existence of God. We're going to talk about Aquinas' first way. And the reason why we're going to talk about this, because I want to do it twice, now and when we come back to it, is because of his very first line. The first and more manifest way is the argument for motion. Right? So St. Thomas says this is the best argument for God. All right. So let's sort of unpack it. All right. So what does he say? What is motion? Change, right? When does change occur? Yeah. Okay. So here and now, like here and now, right? Now most people argue this, thinking, and John Claude already talked about this a little bit, thinking this really just means that it's somehow connected to the Big Bang, where we just keep going back in time, right? So I have a cause, it's my parents had a cause, blah, 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 blah. Just keep going back, right? But that's not what St. Thomas does, right? And I think we have the language to understand this, okay? All right. It is certain and evident to our senses that in the world some things are in motion. We look, something's changing, right? Because there's time. Now, whatever is in motion is put in motion by another. For nothing can be in motion except it is in potentiality to that towards which it is in motion. You guys understand that? Like, can you grasp what it's saying? I can put it in simple terms if we need to. Like, all right. So what he's saying is that change is nothing but reducing potency to act. All right. So the thing has a potential. It's moved to that thing that has potential for it. Yes.
This is another question about time, but
hey, can we stick to this and come back to it? I don't want to lose like the little momentum I have. All right, so where was I? Now, whatever is in motion is put in motion by another. For motion is nothing else than the reduction of something from potentiality to actuality. But nothing can be reduced from potentiality to actuality except by something in a state of actuality. All right, so all he's saying is that the wall can never get red until something that's red gives it red. Okay? It is therefore impossible that in the same respect, in the same way, a thing should be both mover and moved. So the wall cannot give itself its redness. Okay, something that is actually red the wall is only potentially red until it receives it. All right. Therefore, whatever is in motion must be put in motion by another, if that by which it is put in motion be itself put in motion. Okay, so you see where he's going. Now, this is where the infinite sort of regress goes. But not backwards in time, up and down in reality. All right? So the wall got its red paint from the paintbrush. The paint got it from the paint can. The paint can got it from the factory. The factory got it from the dyes. The dyes got it from the plant. The plant got its color from the soil. The soil got it. Like, see how it's going? Like, it's not going in time. All these things are actually holding the thing in existence as it is right now. Okay, and it's difficult to think about all the factors involved in something existing here and now versus later. All right, do you understand? Or versus backwards? All right. Yes, Casey.
Did you make a distinction between I'm here because my father and mother gave birth to me, but if my dad died today, I'd still be here versus. Yeah.
So you're here because you had the potential to be here. That was activated by your legs to get you. So here is really here. Why are you here? So this is really the question of not why does Casey exist, but this is why, or how did Casey exist, but this is why does Casey exist at all? He's really going at why does anything exist at all, right? So existence, nothing is the source of its own existence, right? there was a time when I wasn't here, and there was a time when I won't be here. So I don't have self-existence. Something must give me existence. And so he goes back and he says, okay, well, the fact that you exist here and now, and you can trace it back to certain things, like I exist here and now because my heart is beating. But eventually, you get to the point where something has to have existence in and of itself to give. Okay, something has to be pure act. All right, and this will again, I want to sort of introduce this and not spend a whole lot of time on it, but to know that this is the answer to whether the universe has to be without a beginning or an end. It doesn't matter. So St. Thomas, when he does this, he just simply says the reason why it's fitting that the universe has a beginning is so that it's more obvious that there's a creator. All right, so he's not saying it's necessary at all. He's just saying it's so that God can make things more obvious. Yes?
So before I take all the credit for putting those words out, Matt Fradd made this cool video where he has a boxing match between Thomas Aquinas and Richard Dawkins, and he talks about this and how Richard Dawkins thinks it's an argument about time and then says that's crazy. And he goes, well, yeah, it is, but it's not talking about time. You've misinterpreted the argument. And so he talks about this in really good detail, and obviously St. Thomas Aquinas wins, and it's great.
Yeah. So thinking about this, think about going down into like molecular level versus backwards in time. All right, and we'll come back to this when we do the existence of God. All right, but this is worth sort of going to watch that video because this is an absolutely irrefutable argument for God. All right, the fact that anything exists here and now shows that there's a God. Okay. All right. All right. Let's jump to evolution. All right. All right. So let's talk about the first principles that might apply to evolution, and then we'll see if we can come up with whether evolution is true or not. Okay. That's pretty bold, right? But if the philosophy is bad, guess what? It's a bad theory, right? Because something's wrong. All right, so let's look a little bit into this. Okay. All right, so let's grab the first principles. So the first principles are active potency. All right, I think we've sort of belabored that. Remember change. So evolution is dealing with change, right? So it probably has something to do with active potency. And it's has something to do with substances changing from one thing to another, so it has something to do with matter and form. All right, so there has to be some sort of principles involved in that. Let me think about what else. All right, so here's my question, all right, based on everything we talked about. Can matter bring into existence a new form? So can matter create a new nature?
No. Because you can't give what you don't have.
All right, so Connor just threw out the law of sufficient reason. All right, so why can't matter create a new nature?
Didn't possess it in the first place.
Yeah, so it doesn't have the new nature, right? It has its nature, right? Yes.
So you keep using the example red. I'm going to use the example purple.
Yeah, use something else.
So red.
You guys should go out not using chairs. How many times have you been here and I've talked about chairs? Because
it's
like right in my sight.
Chair is a part
I would
of
think would
me,
be
it's getting weird.
if I have red paint and I pour blue paint in, neither gave it purple, but then purple is there.
Okay.
So my question would be.
So does red have the potential to be purple?
Yes.
Okay. Does blue have the potential to be purple?
Yes.
Okay. So there has to be at least in potency, right? Mm-hmm. The mixture of does lightning mixed with primordial soup, except in Frankenstein, have the potency to create life?
No, because it can't.
It doesn't have life, right? Somewhere it has to be in the. It has to. The effect has to be in the cause.
Have the potency for life?
Do either one of them have life, right?
No, but red and blue don't have purple. They just have the.
So we have to understand the form of what the thing is, right? Okay. Right. So remember though, what evolution is really positing is not red and blue make purple, but it's positing that red and yellow make Rello, like something brand new. right? Some new form that when these two things, that some change in the, some change in the form that is read, some change in form, some accidental change, so whatever kind of change it is we'll talk about, somehow makes this relo, this new thing that never existed before. Yes?
Are we specifically talking about abiogenesis or macroevolution?
Hold on. Yeah, so thank you, by the way, because it's like 2 slides ahead, that question. Because, I'll sort of let the cat out of the bag. Philosophically, microevolution, solid. Because they're really just accidental changes, right? But what happens oftentimes is macroevolution hides behind microevolution, right? There's plenty of data for microevolution, all those things, right? So I haven't gotten there yet. I'm just using evolution broadly because I want to talk about why the two are different. So right now I'm talking about both, but we'll talk about them initially. All right. So there's another principle that we need, okay? So this is an assumption that evolution makes, by the way. Right? Does evolution go forward or backwards? Well, yeah. So it goes backwards, but it's assuming direction, right? But it's trying to show how life moves forward, though, right? Sorry, that was a really vague question. But the point is that it's saying that as time goes on, more and more perfections are shown in history, right? Which that's the problematic part, all right? All right, so in material and living bodies, we find an ascending order of perfection in which the higher beings have their own perfections as well as those of the lower level of being. In the unity of the higher being, the multiplicity of the lower beings is virtually present. Okay, what does that mean? All right, so a rock has being, a plant has being, but a plant has vegetative powers. Okay? An animal has vegetative powers, but it also has sensitive powers. Right, so there's a perfection added on afterwards, all right? And then humans have both vegetative, sensitive, and intellective powers, all right? So the question is, if it's moving in that direction, what is the cause of the new perfection? Okay? Does that make sense? So we have to look at what the cause is, all right? And this is, Connor, do you have a question?
I answered my question.
Okay. Dude, I love yourself answering questions, by the way.
Nice.
All right, this is just, again, we've already talked about this because somebody already brought it up. So we would have principle of sufficient reason. There's a corollary to it, which is just the effect cannot be greater than the cause. All right. So what are we assuming immediately is intellective powers greater than just sensitive powers? Or is it more perfect in being, right? In being it would be more perfect. So can, just looking at it that way, can somehow sensitive powers cause intellective powers, according to this? Can it be a cause? Mm-hmm. Shake your heads no. All right. So let's now make our distinction between micro and macroevolution, and we'll tie it all together. All right. So we're gonna frame in philosophical language, and then we'll ask the question. All right. So in micro, all right. So there's two different things that are being posited. The first is the form does not change, even if the accidents do. All right. Everyone understand what that means? Now that we're in the offspring, there are merely accidental changes. Okay, it doesn't cease to be what it is, right? Remember, so accidental changes are just changes. Think of them as like surface changes, things that don't change the nature or the essence of the thing. All right, and so yes, so we call that microevolution. All right, and data looks pretty good on that. It's probably going to be fine-tuned, but nothing philosophically wrong with that. Okay. All right. So changes in matter, which cause the creation of a new form. Is that possible? Why? Yeah, so new matter cannot create a brand new form. Okay. What's the mechanism by which evolution works, supposedly?
Natural selection.
Yeah, but what are the
mutations?
Yeah, we'll just call them mutations, right? So mutations are just accidental changes in the genes of the of the parents, all right? And so, so the question is, can they? Now, does that mean macroevolution is impossible? Don't look at the answer yet. I need to go back.
No, because God clearly did.
Well, I mean, is it right? Maybe. Like, so maybe it's just wrong. Like, maybe it is impossible. Like, so don't assume the macro. I'm just looking at it from philosophically. Is it possible? Go ahead, Tom.
Is it possible that we and all other animals could be of the same form, just with different acts? Never mind. That all animals, not us included, but that all animals could be of the same form, but with different accidents.
I mean, that implies that intellect is not part of the substance.
Yeah, so he's throwing out us. He didn't include us in it.
Yeah, I was gonna.
So this is where, again, science has it. So what constitutes a brand new species versus, I mean, that's for science to determine. So we could just say, like, all animals have the same form. It'd be hard to, I mean, because, for example, the accidents are different in them. Often, like, you can look at a hair of a black bear versus a hair of a black squirrel, and they're both black, but you know they're not from the same animal. So when usually, when the collection of accidents are different, usually the form is different too. So it's probably more, like, I couldn't prove that, but it's probably more than one form.
What do you mean by accidents? Do you mean like the
what is non-essential to the thing? So most of what we talk about accidents are things that you can see and touch, and like you if you shave off your beard, you're still you. Your beard is an accident.
And so you're talking like there's a certain point where the differences in accidents would suggest a new form, whereas there's hair and no hair, beard and no beard, like different accidents, but not distinct.
Or what is it with like the sickle cell trait versus non-sickle cell trait? Like that's just an accidental change. They're still human. They just have immunity to one thing and one doesn't, right? Yes.
And with contrast, to a certain degree, that would run contrary to natural experience. Because if I have like a blue chair and a red chair, I think they're both chairs, but I don't bring in a hippo and a giraffe.
Right, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like,
assume they're different.
But philosophically, you can't necessarily make a distinction. You can empirically, though, for sure. Right? I wasn't saying they're all of one form. I was just saying that's possible. But the question is macroevolution possible, the way we've described it?
Well, here's
this is really kind of a trick question, by the way.
I already saw the answer.
Don't answer it.
Macro and micro, like, isn't a lot of micro equal to a single macro?
Well, a lot of accidental changes to a being make it a new being. No, because the form didn't change, right?
I could grow like 8 fingers. We could start having more fingers, but if I didn't have fingers to begin with.
Yeah. I mean, suppose we stopped having appendixes, for example.
That'd be great.
And then 7 other things changed in human beings, too. At a certain point, we'd still be human beings, right? But if there were enough changes that we weren't human beings anymore, that would require a new form, right? To cease being what it is. And so the question still becomes, where does that new form come from?
Right.
Yes.
I think there are some examples where if you accumulate enough accidental changes, you have a substantial change. Like,
okay, I'm willing to grant you that. The question, remember, is when that point comes, where does the new form come from? Because matter can't force form. It can't force form's hand.
Okay, so
you see, I don't disagree with that. I can't disagree with that.
Like, I mean, well, it's like the thing. Like, if you have like, a car, and I mean, like replacing like the license plate might be accidental.
Right, but suppose you add a whole bunch of those, and you've got something seemingly totally different.
Yeah.
Right. Where does the new form for that thing have to come from? Yes, Rob.
Well, so biologically, kind of the definition of a new species is when 2 organisms can no longer successfully reproduce.
So why is that? It's related to this question. But
there are just enough of fundamental change. Do you want me to cell biology?
No, I mean what you just said was probably sufficient without Say what you just said. There's enough.
When 2 organisms are no longer able to successfully reproduce, they're different organisms. They're a different species. They're a different type of thing.
Yeah, because they no longer have the capacity to produce the matter for the specific form, right? Okay, so I just want to make sure we frame it in there. So go ahead and say what you were going to say.
Well, that was kind of what I was going to clarify, because we were kind of jumping around. Where does it end? Like, scientifically, when it comes to animals and really organisms in general, that's kind of the line that scientists do. So what are we defining macroevolution as? Are we going
from one species to the next?
Okay.
So micro would be changes within a species. Macro would be changes.
If we look at the domestication of animals, dogs and cats, from my understanding.
What? Accidental? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that's my question. So if we domesticated them from something that was like substantially different, like is a dog different from the thing we domesticated it from?
I mean, I think pigs are a good example. We domesticate pigs, and then within like 3, I don't know the exact time frame, but I know it's a very short time frame, release them back out, like they can go right back to being wild boar-esque. Okay. So I'd say it's definitely.
There's a lady in our neighborhood who walks her pig. I just find it hilarious, by the way.
There was a Russian fox experiment that showed really quickly that within 7 to 10 generations you can get technically a domestic fox, but they can still interbreed with each other.
Yeah, so that would say that's probably not a new form. So could we say animals? Because by nature, Adam was the ruler of the earth. They all have potency to be domesticated. Could we say that? Right? I mean, I think that's a reasonable based on... See, this is where now science meets revelation. We're going to use another example in a second. And it's helpful, right? Yes, Connor.
If we're going back to this question of generation of forms, I mean, if we're saying, okay, matter can't do it, then we have to look something immaterial, in which case we say God is the sort of...
Yeah, so the only way macroevolution works is if there's a cause that can create a new form. And we call that cause God. Right?
Like your example with the car taking apart and changing out parts, you were the cause of changing it into a new form because you have the creativity to do it.
Yes. Yeah. So our idea of whatever the new thing will be. Yes, Connor.
So the question is, could God have used evolution just by? I mean, it would have required him constantly doing miracles, which I think
not necessarily miracles, just acts of creation.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, I mean, no matter what. All the forms that exist, God created them. How He created them, like what the mechanism by which the matter is prepared to receive, so that the new form can receive it. That can be any way. That could be macroevolution. It could be, but the point is that without God intervening, there are no new forms. Right, because a form is an immaterial thing. Material can't create it, so it requires it actually, because there are a multitude of them, requires an all-powerful cause, and so the cause has to be able to create a new form. Yes,
I have one thing. Okay,
and I want to make sure we grasp this. I don't want you to think I'm just slipping God past you, because this is a really good thing for us to understand.
Yeah. Okay. So. Okay, I get what an accident is. I get obviously what matter and form are, but how is form different from accident?
Yeah, so form is what the thing is, and the accidents are the things that depend on the form for existence that don't make the form necessarily what it is. So if I take it again, going back to your example, right? So you are a human person. That's your form.
Yeah.
And then you have all kinds of accidents that, if you lose those things, you're still a human person, right? Be it your size, your location, your mental state, all those things, whether you're awake or whether you're sleeping, all those things are just accidental changes. So think of form, and if it's easier, just think of it as another word for nature.
So nominalists also don't believe in form, so we couldn't use the discussion of form with a nominalist.
Yeah, but you can get them there pretty quickly, because why do you categorize things the way you categorize them if they don't have similarities? Yes?
Okay. So consider a time before any chairs existed. There was probably a time where there was no chair.
Yeah.
And someone made the first chair. Walk me through, did the form exist before that?
Okay, so it's an artifact.
Right.
So no, it did not exist because it did not exist in their mind yet. So when an inventor makes something, like the form is not there.
So God is not the only cause that can create a new form. Or would you argue that God infused the form?
Yeah, so there always makes, like St. Thomas makes a distinction between natural objects and like artistically created, like what he calls artifacts.
Okay.
And so he would say that's one substance, but what makes artifacts different is they're really parts.
Doesn't the form exist? Why wouldn't the form exist in his mind?
In God's mind?
No, in the Creator's mind.
Oh, it does.
Before they make it.
Yeah, that has to.
Okay.
Right? No, I'm not saying that.
Before he comes up with
Before it even existed, he said. And then somebody thinks of it, and they have this pile of matter. The matter can't make itself into a chair, right? It has to first have the form of a chair, right?
How do like the idea of people trying to create new animals, like chimera type deals, fit into this conversation? Like, I am imagining making an animal that is part of this and part of this, and then I can gene edit them into existence.
Yeah, so this is one of the reasons why like the church is opposed to that, by the way, is because especially when you mix human gametes with, like, is that a human? What is, like, and this is another reason why, like, why the church says, like, polygenism doesn't work either, is because humans can't breed with non-human things. And so I don't know, like, what that, like, Pandora's box, I don't know what that would look like, but philosophically it's problematic because that's essentially what you're trying to do is create a new form, which is a bad idea. Yes?
So, can't a form exist in potency can't one form have another form exist within it in potency? Like, my form is a human being, but I also have the potency of being a corpse.
No, you don't, right?
Well, the material...
Yeah, see, that's where it becomes a little bit like a form...
But there would be material changes that result in whatever my material composition is.
So remember, in change, there's always something there's the changing part, and then there's the unity that goes with it, right?
Right.
So when you die, the change is in you, and then the matter goes into a corpse, the form of a corpse.
So the potency is in the matter,
not in you. Touch a form.
Your dead body isn't you anymore.
Yeah.
And when you change the matter, that's what changes the form.
You can change either.
No, not necessarily, right?
Well, not necessarily, but that's what.
Yeah, but remember, we're going back to new forms too, right? Don't get stuck on like. Don't think of these are forms that never existed before.
Well, I mean, but at one point there was never a corpse. There was never a dead organism, and then when it died, it was the first dead organism.
Right, but that is so you could say though that is that you could do that by a law where the leaving of the form that is your soul causes the creation of a new form.
Okay.
So I'm not sure I'm grasping.
Well, I'm thinking, can't we say that? I'm thinking that if you can go from being, if the form can go from being a person to then there's a corpse, why can't one creature, the form of another creature exist in potency in that creature, and then through whatever mutation or whatever.
Yeah, I think if you treat those as separate forms, then God would have to create the new form. Because no material thing can create an immaterial thing. And I think, like, your example may not work.
The forms already exist in, like, the divine intellect. So it wouldn't be a new form being created. It's just a new form.
Well, yeah. So I think you have to.
Actualized.
Yeah, I think you have to be careful, like, about what exists in God's mind versus what he creates. Like, that's the distinction. Not just like they already, because that's getting towards like Platonic ideas where they're all in God's mind, and we just have to remember them. So I think what he creates, like he has to create that form in order for it to exist in the world. Or maybe we should just put it that way. Even if it's in his mind, who knows all things, he still has to create the thing. So he knew you for all eternity, but you still had to exist, so he had to create your soul, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, Connor.
do we draw a distinction between, so
I got one more too that we can unpack.
so kind of just talking about the creation of material things, we would draw a distinction between the creation of the soul and the creation of nature, because the soul is not, the human nature already exists, and the soul is I'm not sure how to call
It's the form. It's the form. Yeah, I mean that's why I was using the word nature, but form is there's a distinction because form is part of an individual substance. It's what it's made up of. So form and nature kind of are the same thing, but they're a little different. Does this at least sort of make sense?
And is matter and substance the same thing?
No. So substance is just an individual thing. That's a little different from the scientific.
Right.
All right, so I was going to do Adam and Eve. I'll just pick this one instead because it's an argument sometimes against. Okay, so Cain and Abel and their sisters. Who did they mate with?
Neanderthals?
See, this is the argument, right? It's like, okay, well, how can you have two first parents? Isn't that incest?
They could have made it with something that didn't have an intellect, but was still close enough to reproduce it.
Is that possible? Ryan, you think that's possible?
I mean, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens did mate.
But
are we sure about that?
They had an intellect.
From my understanding, yes. Or at least that's what it is.
So, I mean,
Can a human mate with a non-human?
No, different species.
If they're biologically compatible, then yeah.
But if they
And
are
you're able to give the
compatible,
intellect.
then the other thing isn't really non-human, is it?
It's like a human.
I mean, it's not right.
Isn't that
Well, yeah. So what is their offspring then?
Human.
Why?
Because they gave the human intellect.
Yeah, I think that would be a huge stretch, right? So remember that parents can only give materiality to their children. Mm-hmm. You don't give your kids their soul. Right? I can't give my soul to my kids.
Thank goodness.
But it would make sense that God would give the offspring of a mating with a soul and a not soul a soul.
Or maybe they just wouldn't mate.
I think it's a cool way of looking at it.
Okay, so all right, let's pretend Casey didn't open that box. So how did we get generation 3?
asexual reproduction.
Probably not.
Okay, so why is incest wrong?
Grody.
Yeah, so we put a taboo on it because it's wrong. All right, and I'm not saying that it's not, but why is it wrong?
Didn't we find that the lack of variety in genes led to far more cases of mental illness and physical deformation?
There should be something before that.
Yeah. So is it just the similarity in genes, or was it the similarity in mutated genes?
Isolated gene pool. If you only have bad traits, then
Yeah, because of mutations, right?
around, yeah.
Did Adam and Eve have any mutations?
No.
Okay.
Why not?
So,
Original sin.
because they were made human, right?
But what? So you mutate as you go forth in life.
Okay, so
After they leave the garden, why couldn't they have mutated?
A mutation in my arm isn't going to affect my whole body.
Yeah.
It would have to be, and again, there would have to be a mutation there before it would affect another organism.
So why couldn't there be mutated sperm in Adam after?
Will that be
okay, let's just say maybe there was. Let's just say there was. Okay. All right, and so he passed that on to Cain and Cain's sister. Okay. And they breed. Okay. So what are the chances that their child has the same exact mutation such that it creates some deleterious effect?
None.
If we really believe in random mutations.
Not necessarily. Because
nearly impossible, right? So incest creates a child that is that usually has something wrong with it because the parents have the same set of mutated genes, not because they have human genes, right? Because we're starting out with Adam and Eve. Guess what they had? Where did Eve come from? Yeah. So they're like fraternal twins, right? Right?
Yes.
So they have the same genes, All right, and so they breed. All right, and let's assume that they didn't have any mutations. Let's just say it's the second generation that has mutations. All right, the chances of those children having the same mutation, according to genetics, is minuscule. Right, probably impossible. All right, such that some deleterious effect would be. All right, so then we can throw away the incest argument. Okay, about that part. All right, so biologically, there's really we can start with 2 and we're fine. Okay, so St. Thomas says you can't. Incest is not against the natural law. Okay, he does say that a parent and child is against the natural law because for a child to have someone who is mother and wife, he's head over his wife, not over his mother. So he says by natural, you can make an argument for natural law, but God's divine law after Noah, and then in Leviticus 18, he says don't do that, right? Because our original sin, if you create a situation where a guy's lusting after his sister, that creates a lot of problems, right? Right, and the fact that we were all kind of grodied about it, it's wrong because it's wrong. It's not wrong because of the consequences, right? The consequences are because it's wrong, right? So the fact that you can have a really messed up kid is a consequence of the fact that it's wrong. It's not the reason why it's wrong, right? I know initially, that's almost everyone's response is like, well, it's wrong because you could have a really distorted kid. And no, it's wrong because it's wrong, and you could have a distorted kid because it's wrong. Yes, Connor.
We're saying it's wrong because God said it's wrong.
Yes. Yeah. You can't, from the natural law, you cannot get to why incest would be wrong.
Brother, sister incest.
Yeah, or even close cousin, whatever. From the natural law, you cannot, there's no way to prove that. And just to be clear, again, still wrong, still really gross, but we need to be told that. We can't figure it out on our own. Yes?
Okay, so you said in Leviticus or in Moses, he said, or two, I think he said it. No. At some point, God says, "Don't do that anymore." It's in the old law.
Yeah.
There are definitely certain things in the old law that we don't have to worry about the fact that I'm possibly wearing a shirt that's made of 2. And if I ate a kid boiling its mother from milk, that's a goat, not a person. I wouldn't have to worry about that. But I've seen people go back to the old law and pick. There's certain things I get, okay, don't murder, that's against the natural law, so therefore it's also wrong. Even God just said it again, maybe to make it clear. But there are also certain things we go back and say, the example I saw was about cross-dressing. It's okay, well, God forbid it here, therefore it's still wrong today. How do we...
Yeah, so you have to, when you look at the old law, what you have to do is you have to pull out what the principle is and then see how you apply the principle today. Right, so why the prohibition on certain foods, or the blood of an animal? Why was that prohibition there? The principle behind it is because the only blood they were supposed to take was God's blood, ultimately, right? So we say now the principle is there, and now the fulfillment of the principle is I need to receive the Eucharist. But so what's the principle in incest? What's the principle it's trying to protect? Or trying to
longevity.
Lusting after your sister, right? Does that principle still apply? Yeah. So,
I think there's also context clues, especially in Leviticus. There's sections where it's this is ceremonial law, and it's all ceremonial law. And then when he starts giving moral laws, there are sections that apply to just the people. And then there's sections that also apply to any aliens that come into the community. And those are more clearly universal. It's even though they're not Jews, you hold them to this law kind of thing. And so you can get some clues from that about what still applies and what doesn't. It's not it's just pick whatever makes you happiest kind of thing. Which is how it's frequently perceived when you get into arguments on the internet.
Yes.
And is there a this is really gross. So,
why can't this be one of your self-answering ones?
I wish it could be, but if somebody asked me, I want to be able to know the answer. So, we talked about siblings, we talked about mother and son. Is there what's the argument against father and mother?
Same thing.
Although he said it's not as bad.
Yeah.
So but there's no Like, so the reason it does, what I would say, is it doesn't make sense for the mother to have authority over her son and the son to have authority over his wife.
Right.
But if a father has authority over his daughter and a father has authority over his or husband has authority, why is
Yeah, the logic, I'm not sure if I could totally
okay?
just make it out. I mean, there's logic to it, but let me think about it.
It's a different authority, right?
Maybe different obligations to the authority.
Yeah, I mean, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, so even though husbands have authority over their wives, they still are subject to them
Yeah,
in certain ways.
Yeah, and it's not parental authority too. It's
Yeah.
manifest differently. And but like the other thing too, that like his argument too about which is really good. So he says it's kind of hidden in there in the very first commandment that God gives, where he says a man's supposed to leave his father and his mother. Right. So he says it's sort of in there, right? And he's saying that's the principle of natural law when it's in the very beginning. So it's connected to our nature. Yes, Casey.
Quick side question. Would this at all apply in an argument for why we don't believe in the married priesthood, that the authority gets wanky?
I mean, I guess you could make that argument. I don't know that I've heard it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that argument. It'd be a good argument.
Well,
But it also can't rule out the fact that it happens.
yeah, but Eastern Catholics allow like.
Yeah, just in priests, not in. So
Yeah.
when they can't become bishops, married priests can't become bishops. So there would be an authority issue there, I think. Yes, Con.
So just to make sure, so we are saying that it is at the very minimum not an impossible theory that the way we got from generation 2 onwards until Noah was incest. Is that what we're saying?
I don't know that we had it once.
I like my theory better.
I mean,
Yeah.
even from
But my point is that like people are like, well, that had to be impossible or gross or whatever. And the point is that it's a perfectly viable explanation.
And then you can tell them it happened twice, because when Noah got off the ark, there were 7 people left.
Yeah.
So are we saying so part of the natural law being like I would have thought part of the natural law was based upon like common human
nature.
Human nature. And then normally I would have thought manifested on like common human inclinations. So are we saying like the fact that like everyone finds incest gross is more cultural,
It's taboo, yes.
natural?
Yes. Did you have a question like 10 minutes ago?
No, I'm good. I had it answered later on.
Okay. So for answering your question, I love those. Dude, those
Well,
are
like,
awesome.
what you were saying, like, I mean, a mutation could be spread, but you know.
Yeah, the fact that it would present itself, the fact that they had the same exact mutation, and that it somehow, I mean, obviously they had mutations because disease got like,
Yeah.
but the point is that the reason or the consequence of incest wasn't there. The consequence of having really messed up children wasn't a reality. So
Even if you had like sterile children, like sterile adults who were siblings who were living together and married, it would still hold that they're wrong. Not
yeah. Greg and Marcia getting married,
Yeah.
not cool.
No.
Yes.
Does the church? So the church's rules like siblings can't get married. So like if they were to, it would not have been a marriage. Yada yada. Is there? How far do those laws extend to?
Yeah, I forget what the laws are. Yeah, I don't know what it is. Like, I think it's third cousins and beyond. I think, but don't quote me on that.
And that has to do with.
For like first cousins in South America, because my family was real big on that.
I think that's a part of canonical form, though, not.
Yeah, well, that's Augustine. One of Augustine's arguments too is like part of the purpose, like one of the instrumental goods of marriage is it brings two separate families together, right? And so it creates unity not just in the spouses by its nature, but also in families. And so that's why he says it's good. It's good for someone to marry outside of their family. Yes.
Okay. Scripture, Bibles. The Cain murders Abel. God puts a mark on Cain, and Cain basically says, like, oh, I can't. He says something that seems to imply that there are other people around that he has to be in fear of. Who are those people?
I mean, you would assume first of all that Adam and Eve had probably a lot of children. I mean, we know that they had girls because there had to be girls around, right?
Why?
Cain and Abel.
Yeah. If there's no girls, dude, we're done.
But that's assuming the
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So those other people would come from that.
So it didn't have to be like, I mean, I guess obviously there's a distinction in time because it goes from like, right, Cain, Abel, then they kill each other, so they weren't like 2-year-old, you know.
Yeah, and remember,
like living like.
So again, like genetics can also tell us why they live so long, right? Like, think about it. Like, there's no like, why do we die?
Something stops working.
Yeah, something stops working. Like if they have perfectly pure human, human DNA and all, like, there's no reason to think that they wouldn't live for a long time. So again, it's not unreasonable to think that somehow those numbers are ridiculous and made up. Yes.
So to be clear, there are no other people that were made at this point. We all originated from Adam.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and that again is like that's straight like church doctrine, like
of all the things in Genesis. Yeah.
And it also stems from the fact that like in a lot of ways we want it that way because that means that if there's like the way evolution works, that somehow like Eve would be either greater or less than Adam, and that there'd be races that truly were less or greater, right? So if they all come from different directions, evolutionarily speaking, then we could look at them and go, yeah, that person is less. So again, like the consequences of what you believe. If you really believe humans evolved, then humans are not equal because there has to be a line of them that were somehow less than because there's no equal, and so then to this day they're still unequal. That's why the importance of Eve coming out of the rib of Adam shows there's no inequality in humanity.
Is there any significance to coming out of the rib versus any other?
Yeah, so it comes right out of the rib because it's right by his heart, but 2, because he's not the head of her, it's not his foot, and she's not the head of him, it's not out of his head, it's right out of the middle. So they're equal. When you really start, like, if you start to like really try to tie together scripture and science, and like what truth is truth, right? And it helps you to understand so much better about like how God is working because He's written it all. Like it's all from Him, and there's nothing to be scared of. Nothing like you just try to understand it and try to apply the principles as you see them. Like that's why we do this. It's not I'm not trying to like ding atheists or something. I'm just saying this is perfectly reasonable, and I can even use your tools to show you how reasonable it is.